was just like, oh shit. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Megan, and I have been documenting my second and final pregnancy here on YouTube. And as you can tell by the title of this video, I'm going to be sharing my birth story today. Yay! My son is actually 3 weeks and 1 day old today, so this has been a long time coming. And believe it or not, I have actually tried to film this video 5 or 6 times, and it never seems to work out. So hopefully like 6th or 7th time is the charm here. So if you have been following my channel, you would know that my baby was due on New Year's Eve of 2018, but I really didn't want him to come until 2019 because of the way the school systems work here. It's just more advantageous for a child to be born toward the beginning of the year versus toward the end. But in particular, I really wanted him to be born on New Year's Day. I just think that would have been such a cool birthday to have. You know, when you get older, there's fireworks and celebrations and countdowns, and I just thought that would be really special. So when I turned 38 weeks pregnant, I got super sick. I needed to go to the hospital for breathing treatments and stuff. And then when I turned 39 weeks, I started getting daily prodromal labor at night. I would get contractions that felt like really, really, really bad menstrual cramps, and they were always 7.5 to 10.5 minutes apart, but they would never get more intense and they'd never get closer together. So those last 2 weeks of my pregnancy, I pretty much tried to do everything I could to postpone labor, partly so that I could get healthy again and recover some energy, and partly because I was so close to my goal of getting to 2019 that I just didn't want to do anything to provoke labor to happen just right at the doorstep of the new year. So I spent those 2 weeks in bed sleeping. I went on maternity leave a little bit earlier than I had planned, and I just slept. I slept. So once I got to my due date, I decided that I was healthy, I felt strong, I didn't feel like I was going to go into labor on my due date. I wasn't feeling many contractions or anything, so I decided around lunchtime on my due date, which was New Year's Eve, that I was going to start gently trying to do things to maybe see if I could get the ball rolling, because again, I really wanted my baby to be born on New Year's Day. So at around lunchtime, I went to the gym, and I walked on the treadmill, like a brisk walk for 50 minutes. Then I did the Stairmaster for 10 minutes, and then I did some like pelvic opening stretches. And then I came home and took a nap, and at around 1:30, when my daughter woke up from her nap, we were all supposed to go to my husband's sister's house so that our daughter could play with her cousins, but our house was a mess, and I wasn't feeling like too energetic and social that day. I was feeling actually very antisocial. So I told my husband that he should just go ahead and go with our toddler, and I was going to stay behind and clean the house because it desperately needed it. So for the next 6 hours, the next 5 hours from 1:30 to 6:30 p.m., I just tackled this house. I cleaned the kitchen, I stripped all the beds, I did all the laundry, I mopped, I vacuumed, I organized, I did all these things. Like I was squatting the whole time and on my hands and knees and everything, and it was a very active cleaning session, and it felt good because I felt like if anything was going to put me into labor, this would have been it. So my husband got home around 6:30. We fed our kid, we bathed her, we put her to bed, and then my husband had some reading he wanted to do. So I told him to go ahead and go do his reading. It was like 8 p.m. at this point, and I decided that I was going to try to get labor going. I remember that my prodromal labor, like usual, had begun at around 8 p.m. I started feeling those menstrual-like Braxton Hicks type contractions, and they were about 9 to 10 minutes apart, which was like the pattern I was having for the previous 7 days. So I went into the kitchen with my labor ball and our oil diffuser with my clary sage essential oil, And I made a big cup of double strong red raspberry leaf tea. I got my 6 date fruits out of the fridge to eat. And I had also bought a pineapple, so I skinned the pineapple and I cut it up into just 3 big chunks with the core included. And I had planned on eating the whole thing. I only ended up eating 1/3 of it. But I sat myself down on my labor ball, I started bouncing, and I had my oil diffuser like right in my face, and I was breathing the clary sage oil in, and I ate my date fruits, I drank my tea, and I had my 1/3 of a pineapple. And I just kept bouncing on my ball. At around 8:55, I decided to start timing my contractions because I felt like they were getting a little more painful than usual, and they seemed to be getting a little closer together. So from like 8:55 until 10 p.m., I timed these contractions in the kitchen, and they were pretty much right on the mark, 7 minutes apart. And within that time, I had also listened to a podcast on the birth hour. It was actually the host's most recent birth story, and she had mentioned that she also used clary sage oil to get her labor going, but she had diluted it into olive oil and had put some on her ankles. I haven't really read about that, but I trust that she knew what she was doing, so I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. So I diluted 2 drops of clary sage oil into a teaspoon of olive oil, and I took that mixture and I put it on the insides and outsides of both my ankles, just arbitrarily placed. And then I rubbed the rest on my belly and on my back, because that's what this one blog post, this midwifery blog post, said you could do. So I've got all this going, and I've got these contractions that are more painful than any of the other prodromal labor contractions I've had going, and they're about 7 minutes apart. And then my husband finished his reading, so I went into the bedroom. I brought my labor ball and our oil diffuser with me, and I sort of set up shop in our bedroom. I actually posted a picture of this on my Instagram because I thought it was funny that this was the way I was going to be ringing in the new year, was like bouncing on a ball, huffing clary sage oil. And I had some of our LED candles going, and my husband was asking me my thoughts, like what I thought was happening. And I told him, it's been over an hour. They're getting closer together. They're getting more painful. I think maybe if I continue encouraging labor to go, that maybe this could be the start of our baby's entrance into the world. So we put a documentary on the TV, and I continued to bounce and breathe the oils in. And for the next hour, I was timing contractions, and they went down to 5.5 minutes apart, lasting a minute each. And the pain was now to the point where I didn't want to bounce through my contractions. I had to lean over my ball and onto my bed, and sometimes my husband would put counter pressure on the small of my back, because the contractions were getting very painful, and the pain was all in my back. It was like this burning kind of sensation, and it was really not comfortable. So we got to like 11 p.m. and I said to my husband, I'm gonna go take a shower because I need to like shower and shave anyway, especially if this is labor starting. But if it's not, then my contractions will space out, and that will give us a good idea of whether we should just go to bed or not, because I was getting really tired at this point. So I went into the shower, showered and shaved, and in that time my contractions remained 5.5 minutes apart. So I got out, and at this point it was like 11:15-ish, 11:20, and I could tell my husband was exhausted, and I was too. So I told him, I definitely think we're in labor, and maybe we should try to get a couple hours of sleep because we might have a busy night ahead of us. So we got into bed. He fell asleep immediately, but I couldn't, of course. I was too excited, and I was also a little discouraged because the second my head hit the pillow, my contractions spaced out to like 9 minutes apart. And so suddenly I started to think, oh my God, this is like false labor again. I cannot believe this is happening. Like, I really let myself believe that this was it. But the pain of the contractions easily doubled. It was so uncomfortable that every time I had a contraction, I had to get into child's pose on the bed and just breathe through the pains. And finally, after 4 of them, I woke my husband up and told him I was going to go in the living room and continue bouncing on my ball because the pain was too much for me to just be laying in bed. I couldn't like handle it or rest through it. So it was a little after midnight. I came out right here to this spot in our living room, and I was bouncing on the ball. And after about 30 minutes, so it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, I ended up calling our labor and delivery ward at the hospital, and I told them, look, at this point, my contractions are now 3.5 to 4.5 minutes apart. I'm having horrible pains in my back, but I don't know what to do because when I laid down in bed, all of a sudden they spaced out to 9 minutes apart. So I don't know what to do because I'm feeling like I should be going in right now, but at the same time, I feel like I'm a long ways away from having a baby. So they told me to take a couple Tylenol, paracetamol, and give it an hour or two and see what happens. So we did that. My husband heard me make the phone call, so he decided to come out and see what I was up to. We took the Tylenol, we waited for an hour, and nothing happened. Like, my contractions were still 3.5 to 4.5 minutes apart. The pain was really bad in my back, really, really bad. And so we called my father-in-law to come over and just sleep here while our toddler was sleeping, and we were going to drive into the hospital. So we left the house at 2:15, and thankfully it was positive 7 degrees Celsius that night here, so there was no ice on the roads, there was no snow, no storms. It was a really easy drive in. And as was to be expected, my contractions spaced out while we were in the car on the way to the hospital. I think they got to be about 7 minutes apart, maybe 8 minutes at times, but they were still coming and they were still painful. Contractions in the car are not fun, especially when you're in a bucket seat. There is something about being like hunched over while you're having a contraction that is horrible. So anytime I had one, I would unbuckle and get on my knees and like brace myself by hugging the back of the seat, because it was really the only comfortable position I could get in to get through the contraction. But we had a handful of those on the way into the hospital. And then once we arrived, I have some paperwork from the hospital where they show me the timeline of how my whole labor went, and they registered me as being admitted at 3 a.m. So they didn't put us into triage. They already knew we were on our way in. They knew how far apart my contractions were. They knew this wasn't our first kid, so they just sent us directly into the room. And the first thing the midwife asked me was, "Are you feeling any rectal pressure?" And I was like, "No, not at all. Like, I am not anywhere near pushing this baby out. I feel like the baby is so high up in my pelvis. I'm just having really frequent and painful contractions. But I don't feel like I'm making much progress." I just had that intuitive sense in me. And it was my biggest fear. I told my husband, my biggest fear was I was going to go in there and they were going to tell me I was only like 2 or 3 centimeters dilated. And sure enough, she checked me and I was 2, maybe 3 centimeters dilated. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe that the 8 days of prodromal labor, the 23 weeks of daily Braxton Hicks, and then several hours of contractions that were anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes apart and hurting this bad hadn't dilated me past a 2, maybe a 3. So that sucked. But she did tell me they weren't sending me home. I was definitely having a baby that day. She said I was 100% effaced, but she did say that the baby's head was high up in my pelvis. So she wanted to give me a shot of morphine right then and there to help me rest and try to like relax into this early stage of labor to see if I could dilate quicker. But I told her before we did that, I wanted to bounce on the ball some more. I wanted to walk around. I wanted to settle into like my birthing space and just make it a comfortable environment for me and see if I can physically get things going first. So she gave me an hour and 15 minutes to try to get things moving along, and then she came in and checked me again, and at this point it was like 4:15, 4:30 in the morning, and I was still the same. So at that point I'm like, okay, go ahead and give me the shot of morphine. I needed something because I had a long ways to go and I was like super exhausted at this point. and in a lot of pain. So she gave me the shot. She also put the TENS machine onto the small of my back and gave my husband a heating pad. And basically he and I just spooned on the hospital bed, and every time I had a contraction he would put the heat on my back. And to be really honest, this was the most beautiful point of my labor, and by far my favorite part of it. I just felt like the lights were off and it was so warm. I was so close to my husband, and the TENS machine and the morphine made me feel so good. My contractions definitely spaced out and the pain wasn't nearly as bad. And it was, part of that concerned me. I was afraid my labor was ending, but the other half of me was like, oh my God, I really needed this break. He was able to fall asleep. We were laying there for 2 hours. He was able to fall asleep, but I wasn't able to. I was sort of going in and out of this like dazed state of existence. I don't know how else to call it. But at 6:30, our midwife came in and said that there was going to be a shift change. So she said goodbye, and then our new midwife came in and she wanted to cervically check me. So she checked me and she goes, so here's the deal. She's like, you're at a 4, but you were a stretchy 4, so I stretched you to a 6. And I was like, yes, this is amazing. Progress. We're making such fast progress. This is great. So she told me at this point, even though she had stretched me to a 6, she still considered me in the early stages of labor instead of active labor. And so she wanted to get me into the tub, the labor tub, to see if that would continue to relax me and help my body to dilate, because it seemed to respond well to the morphine and rest. So I was like, okay, let's do it. So she ran the bath and we got in there. We got into the bath at around 7 a.m. Maybe it was 7:30-ish. I don't have my paperwork in front of me. And I was in the tub easily for 2 hours. And in that time, my midwife would intermittently check the heart rate with the Doppler. But what I found to be so effective and how I labored in the tub was, in between contractions, I was sitting on my knees. And then once a contraction started, I would lean down and rest my body on my forearms so that my whole front of my body was dangling in the water. And then I would, I'd have the water up to here. So my nose was above the water, but my mouth was in the water. And I would breathe in through my nose, like really deep, and then I would slowly breathe the water out through my mouth. And I probably looked like a crazy person, but the sensation of the bubbles, the air bubbles coming up onto my face, and the sound of it just sort of gave me something tangible to focus on, instead of this like excruciating back labor I was still having, because by now the morphine had definitely worn off and my contractions were back to being 4 minutes apart. So I would do that, and just that biofeedback, or whatever you call it, of the bubbles and the sound and the rhythm of breathing in and out was very, very, very like effective for me. And at the same time, my husband would take the shower head and he was spraying my lower back down with really hot water. That was amazing. The hot water on my back, it felt so good. And then the third thing I would do was, once my contraction was reaching the peak and getting to the point of it being just like, I'm wanting to panic because it hurts so badly, I would tell myself over and over, like almost like a chant, nothing I can do right now is going to make this better. Nothing I can do right now is going to make this hurt less. I just need to surrender to it. And in that moment, and these were like some of the most powerful moments of my life, because I've never been able to handle pain, let alone give into it. But once it got to the point of being unbearable, I would give all of myself to the contraction, and I would counterintuitively relax even more into it. It was almost like an act of defiance in a way, kind of like, I'm not going to let this contraction own me. I'm not going to let me tense up and fight it like I did with my daughter's labor. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go completely silent, and I'm going to relax and surrender into this contraction. And it really was very empowering because, like I said, it felt like an act of defiance. Like, I'm not gonna let this contraction own me. So that was a very, very awesome experience to have. But after like 2.5 hours, my midwife wanted me to get out of the water. She wanted to check me to see where I was, and she wanted to get a continuous, like a 15-minute heart rate strip on the baby because I hadn't had one yet. I'd only been being tracked with the Doppler. So I got out of the water and I got onto the bed, and it was in those 4 yards that I walked that I realized just how utterly exhausted I was. I was so spent that by the time I had gotten onto the bed, my eyes were sort of rolling into the back of my head between contractions. And this was not good because I didn't get to this point of exhaustion until I was pushing with my daughter. And my midwife rolled me over back to my side because I wanted to be on my right side for some reason. So she checked me, and then I rolled back over and she goes, okay, we need to talk because unfortunately you haven't progressed at all. You're still a 6. And I was just like, oh shit, because I had this dream of having a natural labor. I wanted this last life experience of giving birth to be one where I could really just see what my physical limits were and what this experience was like and what all of my ancestors have gone through, before the times of epidurals. I wanted to just feel that. I wanted to have that experience. But I was exhausted. I was having such wretched back labor. It was horrible. And when I was on the bed and out of the water, the pain like doubled. I was having my 200-pound husband putting all of his body weight onto the small of my back, giving me counter pressure throughout every single contraction I was having. So I didn't want an epidural, but I looked at her and I'm like, okay, do you happen to know how long it would take for me to get one if I did want one? Because if you're going to tell me there's like a million C-sections lined up and it's going to be 4 hours before the anesthesiologist can get to me, maybe I might want to like put my name on the list and deny the epidural once my time came up if I was still not wanting one. But unfortunately, she didn't have an answer for that. All she told me was that the anesthesiologist that was working that day required patients to have a hep lock, which is like an IV line started in their arm before he would even come into the room. With my daughter, I got a walking epidural and I never needed any IV at all, so I thought that was a little interesting. But I was like, okay, I don't want anything yet. So my midwife says to me, this is what I think. She says, I think we should do one of two things. Either I think you should do some sterile water injections into the small of your back, or I think we should break your waters, or we should do both. So the sterile water injections, I've only heard of these seldomly being done, mostly on the Australian Birth Stories podcast. And it's like mixed reviews. Some women say it helps, some women say it doesn't, but basically it's described as being this terrible burning, stinging sensation of having water being injected just like subdurally, like right under your skin. And apparently, I guess the way it works is it disrupts the pain signals to your brain, and the net result is that your contractions don't hurt as much as you perceive them to without the injections. But I've been stung by a hornet before, and there's no way I would ever willingly put myself in that discomfort. So I told her no, I didn't want the water injections. I didn't think they were going to help me. But I wasn't ready yet for my waters to be broken. I just kind of wanted to think about it for a minute. So she's like, all right, I'm going to leave for a minute and then I'll come back and we can decide what we want to do. So she left. I had another contraction. I became well aware again of how much more painful these contractions were on land, but that I had absolutely no energy whatsoever to walk the 4 yards back to the birth tub. I just realized we're matching. We're both wearing stripes. How cute is that? Anyway, this little guy might be making a cameo because I think he wants to eat. Anyway, so I realized just in that one or couple contractions that happened in the space of time that my midwife had left the room that I probably needed to do something to get my labor going sooner rather than later, because I was definitely running out of steam, and I did not want to get into a position where I'd need an assisted delivery. So when she came back into the room, I said, okay, let's do it. Let's just break my waters because I'm hurting right now. So she went in, she broke my waters, and she placed that electrode on the baby's head to get a good heart strip on him, because throughout my whole entire labor, they were not able to effectively like monitor his heart rate for some reason. So they did that, and I was like somewhat sleeping during the process of having my waters broken, but then I got that first contraction post water breaking, and oh my God, it took my labor to the next level. I cannot describe the intensity of that contraction, that first contraction after getting my water broken. It's indescribable. It was unlike any sensation I've ever had. It was all of the pain. I hate to use the word pain, but like, let's just be honest, it doesn't feel good. It was all of the pain that I was having before in my back, and then all of a sudden I felt this just incredible burning pressure all along my pelvic floor. And I thought I still had hours to go of this. And at this point, I'm like, nope, I can't. I'm not going to survive this. I really wanted my natural labor, but I don't want it this badly. I need help. But of course, these are the thoughts going through my head, but I had so little energy and I was in so much intense pain in that contraction that the only thing I could do was make eye contact with my midwife and give her just this wild, feral look and just whisper, spinal, 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 spinal. Like, get me the epidural now. And so I feel like my midwife tried to postpone, because in my birth plan, I had written that not only did I not want an epidural, but I didn't even want people to so much as recommend it for me or mention it whatsoever. So I think she kind of stalled, and I have to give her credit for that. But she's like, okay, what? I don't hear you, things like that. And then my husband, of course, spoke up for me, and he's like, I think she wants the epidural. So my midwife said, all right, well, we're going to have to put in this hep lock into your arm before I can even go and notify the anesthesiologist. Again, I'm not sure if that's true or not, because I wonder if she was actually stalling on my behalf. But I'm like, fine, I don't care. Put the needle in my eye if you have to. Just let's get this going. So, of course, I only have one good vein in my arms. I've got really poor veins. And when she went to put the hep lock into that vein, she pierced it. She went straight through it and shot the whole thing, which is not her fault. I just have really small, slippery veins. But unfortunately, that meant she had to go to my bad arm and find a vein to use to put this IV line in. And I was feeling so hopeless and so helpless in those moments, because I was just counting in my head how many contractions I'd probably have to go through before the line was in, the anesthesiologist was notified, he finally showed up, he'd be able to give me the drugs would be able to kick in. Like, I'm just counting like tens of contractions, and I wasn't going to survive. I was panicked. I could not conceive of going through even one more contraction at the intensity that I was feeling, let alone tens of them. So as she's putting in the line into my bad arm, I have another contraction. So this is now my second contraction after having my water broken. And it was in this contraction that I became aware that the head was descending very rapidly. But I didn't vocalize it because it sounded crazy, because, my contractions are coming every 3 minutes. So it had only been about 5 minutes since I had had my water broken, and I was a 6 at that point. There's no way I was a 10, and the head was like entering my birth canal at this time. But I remember trying to Kegel during this second contraction, and I couldn't. Literally, like, In retrospect, I know this is a fact now, but in the moment, even then I was aware, it felt like the head had entered the birth canal and I could not clamp down anymore, because obviously there's this giant obstruction. So, but I didn't say anything because I was like just trying to survive through these contractions. And by the way, they were so painful and I was so exhausted that I think I had this contraction without anyone even knowing I was having it. Like my husband didn't put any counter pressure on my back or anything. I was completely silent. I didn't know how else to cope but to just disappear into myself in this moment. So it passed. She got the line in. She told me, okay, I'm going to go get the anesthesiologist. And I literally pushed her and I'm like, go. I feel really bad. I got very abusive toward my husband and my care providers at this point in time. But I pushed her and I'm like, go get the needle man. That's what I was calling him. And so she left. And just as she was leaving, I had my third contraction post water breakage. And it was horrible. It was the worst of all of them. And I just didn't think I was going to survive this experience. And the contraction went up and it peaked. And I was being maniacal up until that point. But after it peaked and it started to go down, I remember yelling at my husband to go get the midwife. I remember telling him that I remember saying the head. I was trying to tell him the head was there. I knew the head was there. It had entered the birth canal. I knew it was there. But I couldn't say anything more than just the head, get the midwife. And then in a split second, I started to push. And I told him, literally, this was me, I'm pushing, I'd never felt the pushing reflex with my daughter for some reason. I just never felt it at all. But it is exactly like people describe. It is this overwhelming, compulsive feeling that you cannot control. Your body just starts to push and you go with it, anytime I got the compulsion to push, I couldn't help but go, it's crazy. It's just like vomiting. When you get into when you're super, super sick and you're heaving over and over and over and you can't stop yourself. That's exactly what this felt like, but just on the other end of your body. I don't know what his face looked like because my eyes were closed, but he went running out of the room. He intercepted our midwife and he told me after the fact that she looked at him with just this gentle smile and she said, I had a feeling this was going to happen really quickly. So she came in and she checked me really quick and she said to me with that same really calm, gentle demeanor, she goes, you don't need help. You're doing this on your own. We're ready to push. There's not going to be an epidural. And I was frantic, the opposite of her calmness. And I looked at her and I was like, lie to me, tell me the needle man is coming. And she giggled and I yelled at her, I'm like, it's not funny. So that set the stage for my pushing. And I pushed for 52 minutes. So this was right around exactly at 11 a.m. And I took my time. In my birth plan, I wrote that I did not want anyone to coach me through the pushing. I didn't want them to tell me what to do. I wanted to just listen to my body and go slowly because I did not want to tear. That was my biggest fear because I struggled immensely with the tears I got with my daughter. So I just tuned everyone out. And unfortunately, like I said, I was really snarky at this time. I think my midwives were trying to give me tips, and I told them routinely to shut up and to be quiet. My poor husband, bless his heart, he would tell me things like, I am so proud of you, you're doing it. He was repeating to me all these things that I had told him and taught him that I had learned, for instance, wanting the head to go out and then come back in, and then go back out and come back in. when it came to crowning, because that would stretch your tissues. I had told him this is what I wanted to have happen because I didn't want to tear. And when we got to that point of crowning, and he's repeating to me these things that I really needed to hear and telling me how proud he was of me, I was yelling at him, shut up, shut the F up, you know. I was so mean, and I feel so regretful for that, because I really did just lose touch of myself. I was exhausted. I was in an incredible amount of pain, and I was not coping well at all. It was not like the euphoric, powerful, spiritual experience that I had romanticized it to be for like the past 2 years. I was just in a carnal state of survival at this point, and whatever came out of my mouth was whatever came out of my mouth. But I pushed and I pushed and I pushed, and I had contractions where I felt zero urge to push, and so I didn't push. But we got to the point of crowning, and my midwife told me, okay, on your next contraction, I don't want you to push, just breathe through it. I didn't know that his head was already half out. I thought it was just starting to, like, the top of his head was just showing like this much. And so I freaked out, because in my head, I had a long way to go to push this baby out, and I was convinced that the reason she was coaching me and telling me how to push, which was against what I wrote in my birth plan, was because I was about to tear, and she had to tell me to do things a certain way. And I panicked. I looked at my assistant midwife, and then to my midwife, and then to my husband, and then back to the assistant midwife, and I was just like, I'm in trouble, I'm tearing, right? I'm tearing, I'm in trouble, aren't I? I was like a maniacal person. And the assistant midwife kept trying to calm me down and say, no, you're fine, don't worry, just keep going. But I was freaked out. And then, according to my husband, the next contraction I had, the one I was supposed to breathe through, was just the most epic amount of ring of fire pain ever. But with my daughter, when I was pushing her, I felt the ring of fire pain along my perineum, which was actually where I had the worst tear. But this time I didn't feel it there. I felt it all the way at the top toward my urethra, my pee hole. And so I turned to my husband and screamed at him, I'm tearing, I can feel it. And I was horrified at the thought of tearing upward, because that seemed to be very damaging, you know, if you're going to compromise like the area where you pee. He told me in retrospect that at that point I was pushing and the nose was passing. So like the widest part of the whole ordeal was passing through my birth canal. But I thought still I was only just starting to crown. But then at the end of that push, I couldn't just breathe through it anymore. I compulsively pushed and the head came out. And oh my God, the sense of relief physically and like mentally, knowing that the head was out and I was a lot more ahead of myself than I thought I was incredible. And I got a little bit of a breather, and I remember hearing everyone say, the head is out, you're doing great, the head is out. And I just, like, my eyes rolled into the back of my head, and I'm just breathing, and I was like full on in labor land. And then the next contraction came, and I got that urge to push, and I felt my midwife sort of wiggling the baby out. He felt big. My daughter, I launched her out all in one push. She just came flying out. But this guy, like, I really had to put some effort into that contraction. Like, I was pushing, I was giving it everything I had, and I felt my midwife sort of toggling his body back and forth. But he was born, and then I got that just delicious rush of slimy baby body and warm fluids, and it sounds gross, but it's so soothing. But I did have a pretty big gush, and I remember saying to someone, oh my God, am I bleeding? Am I hemorrhaging? Because it just felt like a lot of fluid. I don't know if it was my waters or if it was my blood or whatever, but according to my paperwork, I lost 500 milliliters of blood during my delivery, which is exactly average, I think. So the baby was out, and I was like frantically wanting him on my chest, But for some reason, they kept him between my legs, and I don't know what they were doing. Again, I started to panic. Is everything okay? Like, why aren't you guys just immediately putting him up onto my chest? I don't know what they were doing, but they reassured me, don't worry, he's fine. According to my husband's testimony, he said that the baby was actually crying before it was even out. Like, while she was wiggling his shoulders out of the birth canal, he had already started to cry, which is awesome, I think. But I do remember hearing cries immediately, so I knew he was breathing. It felt like an eternity. It was probably only 30 seconds, but then they threw him on my chest, and the first thing he did when he was put on my chest was he immediately lifted his head and was like, wah! And like flopping his head back and forth, apparently looking for the nipple. I thought that was just the coolest experience ever, and I remember crying and just saying over and over and over, my baby, my son, I love you, you know, and you're with mommy, it's okay, and looking at everyone in the room and calling them by name. I was like, one of my midwives, I'm like, Dalal, look it, it's my son, look it, I made this, he's mine, look at my baby. And I was just a crazy person. I'm so like embarrassed. Sorry that I'm playing with my hair so much, by the way. It's really annoying me. It's flat and ugly right now. Postpartum hair. Anyway, and so I was just beside myself in love. And another thing I had written on my birth plan was I didn't want them to cut the cord until my placenta was delivered, but they cut it while it was still inside of me, and that was another one of those things where I'm sort of like, is everything okay? Am I hemorrhaging? Like, why are we cutting this so soon? But I also didn't have the energy to fight it, so I'm like, whatever, everything is probably fine. And it was. My husband said about 20 minutes had passed before they clamped and cut, so obviously the baby got everything he needed. We had some pictures taken by the midwife. One of the assistant midwife was taking some pictures of us, and then my placenta came out totally fine. Really scary to push it out in the beginning, but it felt just like it did with my daughter. I actually enjoy passing my placenta. It's very soft, it's warm, it's slippery. It's scary at first to think you have to push it out, but it's actually really quite soothing. So that was out. I had written also in my birth plan that I wanted to be shown the placenta. I wanted to see it. I kind of wanted to appreciate the organ and everything it had done for me. But bless my midwife's heart, she's trying to show us the placenta, and it was down there between my legs, and I was a mess. All of a sudden, I felt a ton of pain. I felt pain vaginally. I felt it in my bum. I was also all of a sudden feeling very bothered by the hep lock that she had put into my arm. And as she's trying to talk to us, I'm talking over her saying, can you please look at me down there? Am I damaged? Am I injured? Did I tear? Like, I'm feeling so much pain. Can you help me? Do you have pain relief? Just like vomit of the mouth as she's trying to like show us this placenta. So she just sets it aside, and she's like, well, okay. She's like, don't rush it. Let me do a couple things first, and then I'll come back and check you. So she came up to the front of the bed, and that's when she had to do the uterus massage. And I distinctly recall telling her that I hated her. At this point, I said it with a light air, like I was joking. Like I was like, oh, I really hate you for this. But I told her I hated her. And she was pressing on my uterus, and oh man, you guys, that's got to be the worst part of delivery, honestly, because it hurts so badly. But anyway, everything was fine. I didn't pass any clots or anything like that. She finally came around and gave me 2 shots of lidocaine down there, and she checked me. And she goes, so I have good news for you. She's like, the only damage you have is you have a small graze, like a 1st degree or less of a tear. She called it a graze on my perineum. So she goes, I do want to put in 1 stitch, 1 or 2 stitches, but it's nothing at all. And so I was shocked, because I was for sure ready for her to tell me I had like a 3rd-degree tear on my perineum and like into my bum because I was having so much pain there, and that I had torn like my entire urethra off of my body. So I was shocked and immediately relieved. So that was that. And it turns out that the pain I was feeling in my booty was like I had gotten horrible hemorrhoids during my delivery. They're getting much better, but I'm 3 weeks postpartum and I'm still taking stool softeners. I cannot manage without having stool softeners on board, so I'm working on getting those healed, but it's not been fun. But that was it. That was my delivery. And then I was in this state of shock and disbelief and joy at the fact that I had had a baby without an epidural. Like me, the person who can't even handle paper cuts. Of course, if I had had it my way, I would have had the epidural. I wanted the epidural on board even after the baby was born because I was feeling so much pain down there. But 12 to 24 hours after the birth, and since then, all I can say is I am so thankful to God that that I didn't have it, because I will have a lifetime of that life experience to reflect on and to know that I was strong enough to do it. Even when I thought I was going to die and I was begging my midwife to kill me in the middle of pushing, I still made it through. And I'm so thankful for that. It was such an incredible and powerful life experience. So, all in all, my son Sander Van was born at 12:07 p.m. on New Year's Day. I got him born in the year I wanted him to be born and on the day I wanted him to be born, and that is incredible to me. He weighed 8 pounds and 6 ounces, which was 3,790 grams, and he was 50 centimeters long, which was 19.6 inches. And all in all, my labor lasted from that first contraction I started to time at 8:55 p.m. on New Year's Eve until he was out. My labor lasted 15 hours, and with my daughter it was 15 and a half. But the time it took from me going from 6 centimeters to baby being born was only 70 minutes. I pushed for 52 minutes and and like something like 20 minutes or something like that had transpired from 6 centimeters to 10 centimeters and starting to push. So just like with my daughter, again, I went from 6 centimeters to baby being born in 90 minutes, but I had always thought that it was because I had gotten the epidural at 6 centimeters. And that's what allowed me to like relax and dilate. But like with Sander, I got my waters broken at 6 centimeters, and in just about the same amount of time, I went from a 6 to a 10 and baby being born. So that is my birth story. He is doing excellent. Like I said, he's 3 weeks and 1 day old. He weighs a little more than 4,100 grams, which is like 9 pounds and 1 ounce or something. But he is getting super tall. He's grown 5 centimeters since he was born. So he's 55 centimeters long now, and his growth curve went like this. It's almost vertical right now in terms of length. He eats like a horse. Turns out that breastfeeding has become just as much of a struggle this time as it was with my daughter, but because I had that extended stay at the hospital and so many early interventions, I was able to start pumping round the clock when he was 3 days old, to try to stimulate more production, breast milk production. I mostly exclusively pump right now. He still latches and he'll still breastfeed, but for the most part, I'm pumping every 2 hours to try to keep up with his demand, because I'm only able to get about 1.5 to 2 ounces per pumping session total. So I'm pumping 24/7 and giving him to that in a bottle. I'm also latching him either at the beginning or the end of every feed. And in between, I let him cluster feed. I let him use me as a human pacifier. He's allowed to use and abuse me. Any stimulation I can get is welcome. And then I'm also having to supplement him a couple bottles a day. I'm giving him a bottle right now, but when I do bottle feed him, I still make sure to pump to replace that feed so that I can at least keep what little supply I have going for as long as possible. And that's just what I'm gonna do. I use the Medela Symphony at night. I love that pump. It's hospital grade. It's so comfortable and so effective. And then I use my Spectra S1 during the day because it's portable. So I just charge it overnight and it lasts me all day long. Like I pump 6 to 8 times during the day and I never run out of battery. I've taken it in the car with me and I've just put a shawl. I use a pumping bra and I just put a shawl over my body and I've pumped while driving, all around town. I've taken it with me on errands, like I went to the pediatrician with him a couple weeks ago and pumped in the office afterward. I take it with me into the kitchen so that I can prepare dinner for all of us. I'm having it on the couch while I'm snuggling with my daughter. I use it everywhere. I'm taking all kinds of supplements to try to support my supply. I'm on brewer's yeast. I take shatavari. I'm taking moringa leaf powder. I'm on all my regular prenatals, probiotics, vitamin D, and omega-3s. I'm drinking a crap ton of fluids every day, coconut water and regular water. I'm drinking red raspberry leaf tea, Puka, mother kind baby lactation tea. I'm eating oatmeal with Chia and Flax for breakfast every morning. I'm making sure to get healthy fats and protein in my diet. I'm doing everything I possibly can. I follow a specific pumping routine where I make sure to pump for at least 5 minutes after my milk has stopped flowing. I'm doing it all. What have I ordered? I've ordered alfalfa supplements and one other thing. It wasn't shatavari and something else. Oh, fennel seed. I've ordered fennel seed capsules also, which I'm gonna start taking once they arrive. But basically, I'm just gonna do this, and my goal is to make it 3 months of being able to provide him with some of my milk. With my daughter, when I had to give her formula, I despised it. I hated it. It was like a constant reminder of my failure as a woman and as a mother. But this time, I am so thankful for it. I am so relieved that I don't have to listen to my baby screaming and crying and having to deal with the stress of trying to get him to latch if he won't, or seeing him scream at the breast. If he acts that way, it's fine. I give him formula and I pump, and I know that I am stimulating my body and I'm producing as much as I can for him so he gets the calories and the nutrition that he needs from the formula. Thank God for it and for science. And he's still getting all the goodies and the access to my immune system via the milk I'm able to pump. And I'm able to produce, like I said, 1.5 to 2 ounces of milk every 2 to 3 hours round the clock. So he's getting a fair amount of it. He's still getting definitely more than 50% of his nutrition from me. So my goal is to just keep that going through the winter and try to get to April 1st. That's my first goal. And then after that, my goal is to just keep going another 3 months. Ideally, I would love to be able to pump and feed him and also breastfeed for his whole first year. But we're just going to have to wait and see how that works, because it's an incredible amount of work to be to be attached to a pump for 20 to 30 minutes actually, every 2 hours throughout the day. Once my husband goes back to work and I've got both of these kids to look after, I don't think I'm going to be able to pump that frequently, even with a portable pump. But we'll see. We're gonna take it day by day. But let's see if I can turn this little guy around. I call him my little milk drop. My milk drop. This, oh no, come over here. This is Sander Van. I don't even know if you guys can see him. Milky. He's super sleepy right now, as you can see, and he's a little chunk. And I'm obsessed with him, and I love him to death. I have not had any baby blues yet. Postpartum has been a breeze. The only issue I've had is that I had a lot of bleeding this past week, and I was passing huge clots, and this was after I had finished bleeding. So I think I just overdid it and reopened the wound, and I was passing clots the size of my entire fingers. I mean, it was not good. But I've been on bed rest for the past couple days, and my bleeding has completely stopped. So I think we're back on track. But yeah, that's my birth story and my breastfeeding / postpartum update. And on that note, I don't know what I'm going to do with my channel going forward, but I do want to film a breastfeeding follow-up in a few weeks, because that was one of my biggest issues. So I want to share what I have done, what's worked and what hasn't. And I think maybe I'll do some postpartum updates and maybe some like postpartum fitness updates once I get around to working out again. But for the most part, like, my journey is done here, you guys. Like, I logged the whole thing, and here's the end result. This is my little rainbow baby. I got my baby, and I'm so happy. I'm in love with him. So thank you so much to all of you for following along and supporting me on this journey, and giving me people to talk to and share this experience with. It's been just the time of my life. So I guess like and subscribe if you want to follow up with me on my postpartum and breastfeeding journeys. Otherwise, I will just see you guys around sometime. Okay? Bye.